Our featured speaker today is somebody I know you all know, and some of you are actually constituents of hers. So Nanette Barragán has been a friend of this club since 2013 when she was elected to the Hermosa Beach City Council. And she's been very close to us ever since. And we highlighted her actually way back then as a young up and coming Democratic politician, and we were right. Very proud of that. Anyway, Congresswoman Nanette Barragán was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in November 2016, becoming the first Latina ever to represent California's 44th Congressional District. The youngest of 11 children, she was born and raised in the Harbor Gateway by immigrant parents from Mexico and obtained her undergraduate degree from UCLA and her doctorate from USC Gould School of Law. She began her career in public service in the Clinton White House and worked with the NAACP focusing on racial health disparities and discrimination. We know her after being elected to the Hermosa Beach City Council, where she also served as mayor. Nanette is chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and a member of the Progressive Caucus. She's here with us today to speak about the title of her topic is, Can Comprehensive Immigration Legislation Solve Our Border and Citizenship Problems? I've been wanting to do an immigration meeting for a very long time, and finally we have the right person. So, thank you. Okay, lead with that.
Well, good afternoon. Let me see if I can move this down a little bit. Well, thank you for having me. This is a beautiful library. By the way, my 44th district starts in San Pedro and goes right up the 110 north, and it's mostly everything east, going into Long Beach. Although I do have the Harbor Gateway now, which used to be Janice Hahn's district. Maxine Waters district. And it goes into as far as Paramount, a little sliver of Bellflower, and I've lost Compton and Watts, which I used to have originally. So it's very different than the district that I'm in right now. This used to be the second richest district in the country. My district used to be 358 out of 435, just to give you an idea. So you can border it and be right next door to it and be have a very different district. Although I know this district is not the second richest anymore because it no longer includes Malibu. So I have to look up what the new numbers are. But I just want to thank you all for inviting me. Connie, I've known for a very long time when I was running for city council in Hermosa Beach fighting oil drilling along the California coastline here. Connie knocked on doors for me, and I will never forget that. And you remember people who helped you get elected and who helped you get elected when people said that there was no way you could win in a city where I wasn't from, and I didn't live there for a long period of time, but it was really about the environmental issues. And so I'm glad to be here. Now, immigration is a very controversial topic. It has been for some time. And it has been in the Congress, and it will continue to be a topic of conversation throughout the year and throughout this election. One of those reasons is because you have the former president running, and this is what he runs on. It's anti-immigration, anti-immigrants, everything is division and deporting people and sending people back. And that's, I think, amongst one reason that you're going to hear a lot this year. Two, we have the Congress is taking its cues from the former president. If you have followed, I'm going to assume most of you have. My office used to be right next door to Adam Kinzinger's office. Okay, and he and I would walk to the House floor and we would talk. I also came in with Liz Cheney. She's in my class. And when January 6th happened, I was chatting with her about what was going on. And that was the Republican Party from before, right? They represent the Republican Party that was willing to stand up for the Constitution, our democracy, and not let one person basically govern from a phone call, from a tweet on what the Republicans should do. So the Congress has become a lot more polarizing in a very short time since I've been there. I got elected when Trump got elected. A lot of the middle road people have either left or have announced they're leaving. And just last week, I think there was 3 Republicans that announced they were leaving. One of them was the head of my committee, which I sit on energy and commerce. It does everything environment. It does everything healthcare. It does everything telecom. It's a huge jurisdiction. And I was working with her on Alzheimer's treatments and healthcare issues, because I often tell her healthcare is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. It's an American issue, and we need to work together to get these investments. And Kathy and I were working together on making sure that more treatments were available, and that we were pushing CMS to cover treatments. She just announced that she's not running again. So I've just lost her. Larry Bouchon, another member of Energy and Commerce. Quick funny story. My mother ended up at Torrance, Providence over on Torrance, in Torrance, about 10 years ago. And she had an issue. She had to have emergency surgery. Eventually, her surgeon says to me, "Do you know Larry Bouchon? He's a Congress member. He was my roommate in medical school." I said, "Oh, wow." So what did I do? I said, "I'm going to go find Larry Bouchon." I didn't know Larry. And I went to find him on the House floor. And I said, "Hey, Larry, Dr. James Camel." And he looks at me and he says, "Oh yeah, he was my roommate in medical school when he was here at Harvard UCLA." And I said, "He's my mom's surgeon. We should work together on legislation." And we did after that. So there are Republicans in Congress you can work with. And that is happening. A lot of it happens behind the scenes. I'm currently chatting and talking to Brian Fitzpatrick. He's one of the very few middle of the road people that we try to work with on different issues. Those things happen, but it is becoming harder and harder to do so, because either they're leaving or because their leadership will not allow them to work on certain issues. And there is nothing more indicative of that than just looking at the immigration issue. So let's just move on to immigration. And when we do Q&A, I'm happy to take any questions and answer any questions. So immigration has been a problem and an issue for decades. It didn't just start under this president and didn't just start under the former president. It has been an issue for a very long time. And that's partially because we haven't had comprehensive immigration reform passed in a very long time. So let's just fast forward now a little bit to when I got elected. You had the former president was going to make due and good on his commitments to basically deport people, turn people away, and that's what happened. It started with kids in cages. It started with separating children from their families. Everybody remembers that period of time. And these were put in place to deter migrants from coming and making the journey. Now, of course, if you follow and you see where people are coming from, it used to be they were coming from Mexico because they were looking for economic opportunity. Nowadays, if you look at the trends of who's coming, it tends to be people coming from Nicaragua, Venezuela, the Northern Triangle countries, Haitians, and it tends to be more of impacts of climate change. It tends to be impacts of authoritarian governments that they have, communism, socialism. In other countries, they're causing people to come, or there's, stories, of course, of families having lost loved ones, really terrible things happening. And so they're making the journey because we know people die along the way, and it's not an easy journey to make. So you wouldn't generally make that journey unless things were pretty bad in your country. And that's something that we continue to kind of lose sight of sometimes, that these are human beings. They have stories. And if you haven't seen, CNN has done a really good clip, a series on, they took a cameraman going through the Darien Gap. So you could see what the journey is like and how people have to pay money to come, and then they take away some of their goods, and people die along the way, kids die along the way. You don't do that just because you want to go to Disneyland. You come because you're fearing persecution and harm, or you have a real concern. So under the prior administration, there was really a dismantling of the asylum system. There was no investments in things like immigration judges. There was really no investments. It was just about turning people away, closing down the border. People were left to wait in Mexico. You might remember there was something called Remain in Mexico. Under Remain in Mexico, Mexico had to agree to allow people to wait in Mexico while they were waiting for their case to be heard. There were tents set up all over the place. People were raped and tortured and murdered. There were reports that even the Mexican authorities, law enforcement, who have known to have corruption, were delivering people to the cartels. And it was really this outrageous, I think, program called Remain in Mexico that we put an end to, and that this current president put an end to. The other thing that you probably remember is Title 42, and this is all going to tie into what's going on right now. The Title 42 is when you had COVID, and basically the former president said, we're not going to let anybody in because of healthcare reasons. They turned everybody away. And what happened? You saw the highest number of apprehensions at the southern border happening when Title 42 was in place, because people were being caught, they were being sent back to Mexico, and they were so desperate that they kept making the attempt over and over again. Okay, and that's if I had a chart, and I wish I had one, but I didn't have time to print one out. The data is there that under the Title 42 system, you had the highest apprehensions at the southern border. And what have we known since then? When President Biden came into office, he started to create new legal pathways. What do I mean by that? Well, he started a CBP One app saying if you were in one of those countries and things were really bad, you could apply for an appointment so you can just come to a port of entry. You wouldn't have to make the dangerous journey. You wouldn't have to come between the ports of entry. You would make an appointment. You would get an appointment so you can present yourself, and you come in an orderly process across the southern border. And then when you got here, you would be allowed to work. So you would get a work permit so that you could get a job and you could support yourself and you could get housing, right? And that's the process. And that was done under something called parole. Parole. Okay, remember that, because I'm going to talk about what's on the table, what has been on the table for the last several months. And some of these programs are on the table, either to get rid of or reinstitute. So this all started happening when the president was putting these, I'll say President Biden started putting some of these new programs in place. Now, he did some other things I didn't like, where he was deporting more people. He was putting more money into flights to deport folks that I didn't think were getting the proper due process. But in around June of this past year, we all knew it was going to happen. We knew that the president and the administration was going to come to Congress and say, we need money because there's more people coming and we need resources at the southern border to hire more Border Patrol agents, more CBP officers, more people to process what they call border coordinators and processors. They were saying we need more money for ICE detention beds. They were saying we need more money for a number of things like combating fentanyl from crossing the southern border. So at that time, President Biden made a request for Congress. We're going to call it the original supplemental. The original supplemental. And when he put that request in, the president combined it with foreign aid. Now, I am told the reason the president did that, which I will tell you, I think was a mistake. Okay. My opinion is it was a mistake. The reason he did that, I'm told, it's because at the time, Kevin McCarthy, who was speaker at the time, said, we will not consider aid for Ukraine unless you give us money for the border. And that was my understanding of what the ultimatum was. So the White House basically threw up their hands and said, okay, fine. So when they put the request in for the original supplemental, it was tied to Ukraine aid. It was tied to Israel aid. It was tied to humanitarian aid, Taiwan, and so on. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and I serve as chair of the Hispanic Caucus, we called on one of two things. We either said, take anything on the border and immigration out and only have a foreign aid bill because we should not be set a bad precedent. If Republicans are saying right now, we won't give you Ukraine aid unless you give us this other thing, what prevents them from down the line later saying, we're not going to give you foreign aid unless you take away a woman's right to choose and you write that in the law? What's going to prevent them from down the line holding hostage some domestic issue? And it has not been done before when there has been emergency aid for foreign allies and countries, okay? So this was setting a really bad precedent. And we said to the White House, do not do this, strip it out. I said to Chuck Schumer, do not do this, strip it out. We shouldn't be the party that's using our immigrants as political pawns, because the other party does it all the time. Why are we going to allow it to happen? Well, what happened? They didn't listen. Okay. They didn't listen to me. They didn't listen to other progressives who were making this argument. So what we said then, if you're going to allow this supplemental to happen, which was the original package, don't make any immigration policy changes. Just keep the border money you're asking for leave it at that. Don't make policy changes. So just to give you an idea, the original supplemental had things like $850 million to combat fentanyl from coming across the southern border. It had at the time is $1.2 billion for cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, to be able to handle the influx that they were now seeing in some of the cities across the country, so they could get housing and services for migrants. Okay, it included a lot of things, including $1 billion in ICE detention beds, which I don't even agree with. Okay, because I think there are better ways, alternatives to detention. That's what we said. We said, don't include immigration policy changes, just the money you need. And we know you need money. Let's keep it clean. Okay, that's how I'm going to call it, at the clean. But that's not what happened. What happened? Then you started hearing in the Senate that there were a group of Democrats working with Republicans behind closed doors with not a single member of the Hispanic Caucus, who, by the way, has been leading on immigration issues and working on immigration issues. None of us were in the room, not a single senator. They were all shut out. Not even a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee was in the room. And by the way, our Senator, Alex Padilla, is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee on Immigration. He was not even in the room in the Senate. Okay, so they worked behind the scenes for many months in secret, behind closed doors, without even telling me or consulting with me or members of our caucus on what we thought would be good about policy or not. Or we were just given updates here and there, and they were general, like, we're making progress. Well, what does progress mean? Well, I can't tell you the details. Okay, so what ended up happening then was the Democrats, the Senate Democrats, let me back up. Right after, just so you have context, right after the Kennedy Center Awards, I don't remember what month it was, I saw Chuck Schumer and I said, I dare you to put the foreign aid package with the border that was clean on the Senate floor and make Republicans vote against that border money and the Ukraine money and the Israel money. And he said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that this week. And he did it. And Republicans said no. So we can go and we can tell people Republicans have said no, and they have voted against $850 million to combat fentanyl at the southern border. They have voted against $1 billion in ICE detention beds. They have said no to millions of dollars to process people at the southern border. Why? Because they don't want to help the problem. Do not be confused. They do not want to help the problem. Why? It's an election year. This is their election issue. Okay. Add to that, Donald Trump picks up the phone and he's like, hey guys, you can't do anything to help Biden or that southern border because I'm running on this. And we know they're taking their cue from the former president. So when this deal was announced, the Senate had come to a deal with, let me say, in my opinion, bad immigration changes to policy that we have not been asking for. When that happened, the former president called. He started making phone calls and saying, you guys can't pass this. You can't pass this. Not because it was going to fix the problem. It was because Democrats will be able to go and say they did something. And I've got to tell you, in my opinion, it wasn't going to fix the problem. And it was going to set real immigration reform back 10 to 15 years. Because now we've given up something and we got nothing in return on immigration. And when you have a real negotiation back and forth, You're giving up something and you're saying, okay, I'm willing to give you something. I'm going to make something up. Let's say they say we want the border wall. Okay, I'm going to give you the border wall, but you give me dreamers. You give me DACA recipients and you give me that pathway for dreamers. So you're giving me a legal pathway and I'm going to give you something that I think is bad and a waste of money. But if that's what you want, that's a negotiation. That's not what was happening here. It was a hostage taking. They said, you want Ukraine aid? The only way you're going to give Ukraine aid is you give us this change on immigration policy. And these were permanent changes. So when the Senate deal got announced, I'll tell you the story. This was the Sunday, and I got a call from the White House. I got a call from Senator Murphy about, hey, we want to go through this bill now that it's final, now that it's written. Now we want to go through this bill with you. And I was on the phone and I was taking notes, and it was the bad stuff. Like, I can't believe we're giving this up. What's going on? How come we're not getting anything in return? Not even dreamers. And Trump starts to make his calls. He starts to put his tweets out. The next day, we had Senator Murphy in the Hispanic Caucus meeting. And he was briefing the members, having a back and forth about what was in the bill, when at the time a tweet went out. As we're in this meeting, the tweet went out that McConnell was now telling Republicans not to vote for the bill that he negotiated behind closed doors, telling his member Langford what they were willing and willing not to do and what to ask for. Republicans got almost everything they wanted. You know what they didn't get and they really wanted? They wanted to take away the president's parole authority. Remember that a program I mentioned that the president started to have orderly migration at the southern border, where people got on an app, a CBP1 app, and they could make an appointment instead of making that dangerous trek? They wanted to say, no, you can't do that. You cannot allow people to do that. Why would you take away an orderly process? Because you want chaos. You want people to come and you want the photos and the images. And that is what is happening. What is happening right now is Republicans have said no to everything. In the past, Republicans have said they want money for more Border Patrol agents. They have said they want more money for ICE detention beds. All the things that were in that president's supplemental bill are the things that Republicans have always said they wanted. But now they're saying no. Now, what's the new line? The new line is, well, we don't even have to pass legislation. The president has the authority to fix it. Guess what? You can't fix something if you don't have the funding and the resources to fix it, right? Or they're saying, okay, well, then give us changes to immigration policy. And then now they're talking about bringing back Remain in Mexico, which is that program I told you that Mexico had to agree to. Mexico has said they are not going to do Remain in Mexico. They are not going to allow people to go back there. By the way, it wasn't good for the Mexicans either. So they have said no. So what just happened on Thursday? The latest is on Thursday, in the US Congress, a group of bipartisan House members, Democrat and Republican, have come together to put out a proposal. And one of them is a good friend of mine, my friend Fitzpatrick. I'll tell you though, it's a bad bill. Let me tell you why it's bad. It's bad because the money the president has saying he needs to help address the southern border, like to hire more border processors and more CBP agents, and $850 million to combat fentanyl from crossing the southern border, there's not a penny of that money, not one penny of that money in this bill that was just released on Thursday. The money that would go to cities, the shelter and programs money, that there was $1.4 billion. It was 1.2 in the original supplemental, and then the Senate deal, it was 1.4. There is not a single penny of money for cities to help either. There is, what doesn't make any sense to me is, if you go watch on television, the first thing they say is, all this fentanyl is coming across the southern border, and it's all happening because of migrants. Totally not true. By the way, most of that's coming from American citizens through ports of entry. But this is their talking point. Yet they're not going to give one single penny to combat fentanyl from crossing the southern border. So folks, don't be confused. Don't be fooled when you hear, folks say, we want to fix this on the other side. We want to fix this. We want to do something. They really don't. I do believe that we can address issues at the southern border. In this climate, will we see comprehensive immigration reform? I don't think so. Comprehensive immigration reform would be a very large bill, and it would have a lot of give and take. What I do think is possible is a smaller bill where you would see something like they're going to give us dreamers and finally get that off the table and give a pathway to those in exchange for some things that we're not going to like. Maybe it's a border wall. Maybe it's some authority to shut down the border. But that would be a real something to consider and to think about, because you're giving some pathway to the folks that have had uncertainty, right, that live here, right, who have lived here their whole lives. So I do think that is more possible. How it would happen is a bigger challenge. You would almost have to set it up so you had 10 Republicans willing to cross the line. Because the way Congress works right now is Republicans set the agenda. They're the ones who set what's on the floor, unless you do something called a discharge petition, which means Democrats start it. We get our members to sign it. Now, you have to get all the Democrats on board if you're only going to need like 10 Republicans, or maybe 5, given the very short numbers right now of the very small margins, I should say. But even I went to talk to Republicans that are the moderates, like the Don Bacons and the Fitzpatricks, the middle of the road people, the people who came out with this Thursday bill that's not good. Even I went up and said, how come you guys won't start a discharge petition? Don't you want the Ukraine money? Like, this is critical money that Ukraine needs right now. And it doesn't have any of the controversial border stuff in it. And you know what they said? We can't do it. We just can't do it. Number one, the majority party never signs discharge petitions. That is bad. It's only been done twice in the history of Congress. Only twice. It's not good for them politically, first of all, to go against their party. We know what happens when you go against your party. Look at Adam Kinzinger. Look at Liz Cheney. Just last week, Mike Gallagher, who I came in with my year, he's younger than I am. He's in a safe Republican district. He voted against the impeachment of the DHS secretary. I can't confirm he's gotten death threats, but I'm pretty sure he has. What happened this week? He announced he's not running anymore. He's not running because he was willing to stand up for the Constitution. He knows what's right. And he's a guy who wasn't going to sell out. And so middle of the road Republicans have said, we are not going to sign a discharge petition, which right now Democrats are trying to figure out how can we get that Senate bill that passed, which is a clean foreign aid bill, through. How do we get that done? Is there any way? And right now, those Republicans that could help make it happen have said no. But I do think maybe, just maybe, they're going to feel some pressure when they see that this new bill they put out on the floor, the Thursday one I think they just quickly threw something together to be able to say there was something out there. But it's not, I can't even imagine the White House is going to be for some of the things in there. So that's where we are on immigration. And the reality is that, number one, Democrats need to take the House back. Democrats need to take the House back, and we need the biggest margin we can get. Because even within our own party, on issues, we sometimes see the split. So that's the latest on immigration. I'm going to stop talking so that you guys can ask questions. And I'm happy to share stories and answer questions. And I know at some point we're going to go offline where I could speak a little more freely. And given that we're in a smaller group here. So with that said, who wants to call on the members in the club?
And then also, so I can
Okay.
go online, but let's go in person first.
Okay.
If we could bring up or you want me to sit here? So. And if you were gallery.
We're gonna need the questioners to talk into the mic though, too. So
That's right.
Yeah.
Or no, what we did last time.
Yeah.
You're okay if you can repeat the question?
I can do that. Okay.
You can choose whoever you want.
Oh, well, I'll let someone else be the bad guy.
All right.
I won't do it.
Hi, Nanette.
Hi, Bob.
Just a quick question.
Yep.
The Republican moderates who are not running again, why wouldn't they be willing to sign a discharge petition?
Yes.
It's one thing I just don't understand.
That's a really good question. I haven't spoken to any of those yet. But some of those Republicans, you know, probably want to leave Congress and make money at some point, and you need to have relationships and you need to be good with your party to be able to do that. And my guess is there's probably some calculation about just leaving and not getting into that. I mean, think for a moment, like Adam Kinzinger, who I love, like, I think he's so, like him and Liz have had a harder time. They didn't, like at some point they were sitting on the Democratic side. So I think for maybe long-term thinking is, could be it. But I can't tell you because I haven't spoken to some of those folks. And some of those folks are harder line on immigration anyhow. So they may not be willing to sign on. The people that I think are the ones to really watch are the ones that are in these purple seats, the ones that you all probably are making calls to unseat. Those are the ones that are what we would have the best shot at, right? It's going to be because they either are sitting in Biden districts and they want to help appease the constituency. But the ones that are leaving that are moderates, but in red seats, I don't know. That's a good question.
He's on Zoom. Right?
Oh, I didn't repeat the question, did I? Did I repeat the question? I forgot if I did. Okay. The original question was, why don't the moderates who are leaving Congress sign on the discharge petition? That was for the last question. Okay, I'll do a better job.
Can you hear us? Mayra, and you can ask your question.
I had a question about the general immigration issue is a weakness for Democrats, and you can see when moderate Democrats run like Tom Suozzi, he sounded more like a Republican on immigration than a Democrat. You're seeing Democratic governors and mayors complaining about this influx of immigrants because it's a weakness. And, you know, I am an immigrant and I wish this wasn't the case. But if you look, this is a worldwide phenomenon. You see it in Europe. People who are running on extreme immigration policies are gaining power. So if you want to stay in power to act on immigration or any other issue, climate, healthcare, you have to win your seat. So this policy of, you know, open borders or being very lenient towards immigrants is going to make you lose power, and then you won't be able to do anything. So, you know, my question is, those on the far left or very progressive issue on immigration in our party have to see where public opinion is currently and meet it.
But repeat the question part again.
I'm saying that those on the progressive side of the Democratic Party on immigration have to see where the public opinion currently is regarding immigration, and it's not where they are. I mean, there's a deep discontent, not just with Republicans, but even with Democrats on how immigration has been handled under this current administration.
Okay, thank you. So the question, if you all didn't hear it, was he mentioned the Suozzi race that just happened in New York on Tuesday, and that he sounded more like a Republican, and that Democratic governors and mayors are even concerned about the immigration issue. And then lastly, he pointed out or made a point that that progressives need to see how Republicans are looking at it, because the public is not where progressives are. So let me take those one by one. Number one, if you were a governor and a mayor and the federal government wasn't giving you money to help with the influx, you would be complaining too. That doesn't mean they don't value immigrants or think that they're adding a contribution to this country or that they don't welcome them. They're asking the government to help with the funding for that. And Congress has failed to do that, partially because we have Republicans in control that are not going to give a dime to the cities to help. Remember who started this? It was Texas Governor Abbott, who basically was lying to people and what I will call a form of human trafficking and sending people to these cities so that these cities could deal with them. And there's no money and there's no resources for these cities. And therefore, of course, you're going to hear them say, hey, we need Congress to act. So we, Congress, have to do our job, and we have to act by getting these cities money. I believe there should be an infrastructure set up nationwide that any city in this country could be able to host and welcome in migrants into this country. That's what I think. That system is not set up. And so that's why you're hearing that from these mayors and these governors. And that's one of the reasons that they were supporting the original supplemental. And you saw many governors and mayors sign on to the original supplemental that I mentioned to you from the beginning, the June 1, because they were for that. Second, you mentioned the Swazi race, and you said he sounded more like a Republican. Well, if you are saying that, you're not paying close attention to what he did. And I hate hearing sometimes when our Democrats are repeating Republican talking points. Because if you go and you listen to the interview with the pollster that did that race, the pollster that did that race will tell you that Swazi ran ads on immigration and he focused on the need to have pathways to citizenship and legal pathways. And he ran on dreamers and giving dreamers that chance and making sure that they were included. So he wasn't saying shut down the border, just deport everybody. He may have said shut down the border at the end, but he was running ads on providing that pathway that, by the way, all the progressives have just asked for. And have said, well, why don't you give us something in this deal? Which there is nothing of. So make no mistake, the conversation is Democrats want to do something about the border. There is no open border policy. There is no open border policy. You can repeat the myth and the lies from the Republican. It's not going to help us. It's not going to help us. There is no open border policy. If there were, you could come to a port of entry and just claim asylum, which is, by the way, is a legal right to do. You can't do that right now in this country. That's why people are coming between the ports of entry. Because if you could do that, you wouldn't have to go between the ports. Everybody who comes between the ports, they turn themselves into the officers. They would do that at the port of entry if they were allowed to. But because right now we are actually not even allowing asylum in this country to work how it is in law, is why you're seeing this happen. And part of it is because our immigration system is backed up, because nobody wants to put the amount of money into immigration judges to speed up the process so it doesn't take you 3 years. Okay, so I'm just going to say that progressives do want more than maybe what middle of the road folks want, but progressives want a pathway. They want a give and a take, and Democrats should all be for immigration reform. There's no doubt. And by the way, we all agree the border is broken. We all agree that. Progressives, moderates, blue dogs, we all agree that, okay? The question is, how do you fix it? And how do you invest in it? And that's going to require some tough compromises that progressives, and I'm a progressive, are willing to make when you give us some pathways. And let's start with Dreamers. It's bipartisan. 70% of the American people agree with it. There's also something called the Farm Worker Modernization Bill, which will give protections to farm workers who put the food on our table. That's bipartisan as well. And it passed the House in the last Congress. Let's start with that. But you know what? Republicans don't want to give you anything right now. Not anything. Not a single penny for the border. Not a single pathway. Nothing. Because this is their campaign issue. I think I answered it.
I think you did. Rob Wynn.
Hey, Nanette, I have a question, and I think you, your comments from the previous caller. How do you deal with fellow progressives when you're on CNN or MSNBC and they, or even journalists, when they keep repeating their lies? Open borders, stop the steal, Hillary's emails, Hunter Biden's laptop. They keep repeating these lies over and over. We don't have to. But even some of my progressive friends or some of the GOP MAGA types keep repeating these lies. I mean, how do you deal with it all?
So you said progressives are saying this stuff on TV. Oh, journalists, how do you deal with journalists that are saying things like there's open borders? They're repeating the stop the steal lies. They're repeating all the, what I call disinformation. the Hunter Biden laptop. So, by the way, I shouldn't. I'm going to answer part of your question when we go offline. Okay. But you know, you have to be the person who's doing the interview that interrupts them and stops them or responds to the lie. We are in a different time in this country where disinformation happens every single day. Back in the day, you could never get away with like lying on your resume like George Santos did and then getting elected to Congress. Like that would be the biggest thing. Now, who was his opposition research person is a whole nother conversation. But that is what Republicans do now. And people repeat these things because that's all they say over and over again. Then other people start repeating it, and it's really bad because then the public in general just thinks it's the truth. And you even see that now when you do the survey of how many people think the election was stolen. I mean, it is just remarkably disturbing on what the percentages are. But if you say it long enough, people start to believe it. So you've got to be the member. If you hear the journalists say something that's wrong, you need to correct them. You know who's really good at this? Pete Buttigieg. The best on going on Fox and doing this. By the way, Mitch Landrieu did this the other day on television on NBC. I forgot the name of the journalist, but he stopped her and it kept interrupting her to point out what was not accurate. And we have to do that too. Everybody in this room has a responsibility to do that at your dinner table, with your friends, with your family, with kids, right? It's not an easy conversation, but we just can't help spread it. And don't be that person repeating it. We want to go off after that?
So
Yeah.
hands up, please, so I can see. Adrian, you had yours up a long time ago.
Regard to the Democrats, the Republicans on the purple seats.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats are on their game this election year. Those folks are going to lose their seats. So might you be able to split some of those with regard to party registration? Because otherwise, they should be out. If they're in a seat that Biden won, there's no reason why there should be a Republican represented at this.
So the question is, there's the focus on Republicans and purple seats, that those should be, prime for us to flip, especially given what's going on in Congress now. And there really should be no reason for a Republican who won in a Biden district to lose under the current circumstances. I wish it were that simple. And this is my answer. I wish it were that simple. The country in general disapproves of Congress. But when you start to individually go district by district on whether people approve of their congressperson, that approval rating is a lot higher. So it's the collective of Congress that has like the bad reputation. Now, I will say, I'm 100% with you. Just compare, and this is what I tell people, compare what Democrats were able to do when they were in the majority than what two Republicans are doing now in the majority. They've done nothing. Absolutely nothing. They can't even keep the government open. If you take a look at every vote we've had this Congress on keeping the government open or lifting the debt ceiling, more Democrats voted than Republicans to keep it open. That does not happen in the history of the Congress, because usually the party in power knows it's going to be placed the blame on them, and they govern, and they can learn how to govern. This Congress can't do anything. As you've been following, or we even haven't had a budget passed, and we're about to go to Washington, D.C. next week with 3 days to pass a partial budget before March 1st. This week in Congress, we were supposed to vote on FISA, 702, privacy. I'm not going to get into the details. We couldn't even get that done because Republicans are over there fighting again amongst themselves about it. So you know what they did? They say, well, we can't pass a rule, which is, by the way, what Republicans are supposed to do when you govern. You pass a rule to have debate, and when you pass a rule, you only need a simple majority to get something passed. When you can't pass a rule, now you need 2/3 of a Congress. It's called suspension, okay? So what happened? They couldn't pass a rule on this, so they said, well, since we can't govern and we can't figure it out amongst ourselves, everybody go home a day early. And they canceled Friday votes. I mean, it is really, I mean, not only Democrats, Republicans are over there saying, scratching their head. And they're worried, especially the ones in the purple seats, because they know they haven't done anything. And you just take a quick little look. In the last Congress, when we were in control, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in climate change. We passed the Chips and Science Act, putting more jobs here and creating more manufacturing jobs right here in the US. We passed the American Rescue Plan to put shots in arms and was able to reopen schools and people got, assistance. We passed the infrastructure bill, by the way, the thing Trump said he was going to always do and could never get done. We did so much. We passed the PACT Act to expand the biggest benefits, healthcare benefits for veterans in one Congress. And what do these guys have done? They can't even keep the government open. So, I mean, I hope the voters look at this and say, we need a party that's going to keep our government open, that's going to govern, and that's going to, make sure that there's progress for the American people. And that's my hope. But you know what? In these purple seats, you have some of the people who believe the election was stolen. And it's not just about telling them the facts, because they don't believe some of them as facts. So we got to do the work. And the candidates matter, frankly. The candidates running in these districts matter. Sometimes you have candidates that can raise the money, get their name out. Sometimes you have candidates who can't. Sometimes you have candidates who've got great stories, but can't even tell their story. Or you got candidates who maybe have money, but something happened and there's a ding. And guess what? Republicans are going to use whatever that ding is or that bad thing to try to make sure they keep the seat. There's a lot of factors. It's not as easy as just saying, because Republicans have been so bad, these seats should all flip. And this is, by the way, where all your help comes into play. And that Swazi race, I think, was a good indicator of we got to do the work.
Personal privilege.
Yeah, well, this is a follow-up, because you were talking about dreamers, a lot of people agree on that. So that would be an easy one.
Yep.
So another one I was reading about is Representative Smucker Republican from Pennsylvania, and Kohler Democrat from Texas. They introduced a bill called the Essential Workers for Economic Advancement Act. And what that had to do is like what you were saying, is most of the people trying to come over is because of poverty. It's might not necessarily be asylum, but they're escaping climate change issues, poverty, and so forth. So there's so many jobs here that need to be filled. They talk about 3 million jobs. We only have 140,000 visas available. So they want to do this act to say that a particular state, if their unemployment rate is below 8%, that they have an ability to sign, to have more visas. And so do you think changing our visa laws would get more people together and in terms of bringing more people in?
Can I add on to her question?
Go
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably should have asked this at the very beginning, but what are all of the policy elements that we Democrats want to see in comprehensive immigration legislation? Anne mentioned some. Yeah, I'm unclear on what it is, all the elements are that we should be advocating for.
So, anytime you can expand work visas, I think would be a good thing, especially for this country. If you didn't see this week, the Congressional Budget Office said that that the economy is doing really well. And one of those reasons is because there's been such an influx of immigrants who are working, that is one of the reasons we're doing so well. And I think the estimate was like $7 trillion over 10 years or something like that. And so it just kind of goes to the narrative that immigrants' contribution to the economy in this country is huge. And without them, you would see we'd be in a lot of trouble, including the issues you just mentioned about helping with the work shortage issues that we have going on. So yes, we support efforts to expand visa programs. One of the concerns is if you only rely on high-skilled programs, and that has been something sometimes Republicans are for, but then we leave behind other migrants who provide other, have others that maybe want to take jobs that Americans don't want, or lower skill jobs, and it shouldn't just be the high skill jobs. So what kinds of things are Democrats for? There is so many to name, but the easy ones to start with are the bipartisan ones, which are Dreamers. It's called the Dream and Promise Act, which includes TPS and includes DED and those who've been in this country forever. It includes things like the Farm Worker Modernization Bill, which is another bipartisan bill that also passed the House, that would provide protections for farm workers and also help it make easier for people to be able to come and work on farms. And then there's, other legal pathways for the current undocumented folks that don't fall under the Dreamers, like the parents of, and those people who've been here for 20 years and still haven't been able to, get pathways to citizenship. But we also are for things like more technology at the southern border, more investments in stopping fentanyl from crossing the southern border. If you ask the Mexican ambassador, how can the U.S. help combat fentanyl? You know what they say? Stop allowing so many guns to be sold to the Mexican cartels. Because you know what? It's hard to get guns in Mexico. They're all coming from the U.S. And so that's what they say. But you know what? People aren't touching that issue. Republicans aren't going to touch that issue, right? So we're for things like making sure that those things are in place to prevent it. We're for making sure there's enough officers at the border. We're for alternatives to detention. We're for investing in the immigration judges so that you can address the backlog. And we're also for things like making sure it doesn't take 4 years for somebody to have their asylum claim heard. We're for making sure that especially unaccompanied children have access to counsel. By the way, if you heard this rumor on the Senate deal that unaccompanied children were going to get access to counsel, it's partially true. It sounded so great. And when I went to read the fine print, I learned that it only covered unaccompanied children 13 and under. Why is this a big deal? Because most unaccompanied children are 14, 15, 16, and 17. So 90% of unaccompanied children were not going to get access to a lawyer. It was only 10%. So I tell people the devil is always in the details. So we are for so many things. The legal pathway and providing citizenship. You have to have, if you're going to have tough enforcement provisions and border security provisions, that's going to make it harder to get asylum or get into this country, that has to be coupled with the pathway. And that's, I think, the recipe to help address what's happening. Because if you don't have that pathway, then the people are going to be incentivized to continue coming between ports of entry. And that is the problem we're having. And that's why it's not orderly. Because they're trying to get their foot on U.S. soil, because that is basically what you need to be able to ask for asylum. Okay,